Christmas has a complicated history in the Black community, and our relationship to it is often omitted from historical narratives about the holiday in America. I have tons of good memories of Christmas growing up, and I definitely celebrate in a secular manner as an adult. As such, I wanted to dive into its heartbreaking and illuminating history as a follow-up to a Black people's history of Halloween. What was Christmas like for the enslaved on America's plantations? Turns out it's a complicated story. Which 19th century tradition involved Black people dressing up in costume, caroling, and harassing white people for alcohol and trinkets? How has Christmas been a tool of liberation and radical action? How did we get Black Santas? Grab a snack and get comfy. It's time to explore a Black people's history of Christmas. Stuff in this episode, and even before Christ, it's important to know that celebrations near the winter solstice have long been a part of the human experience. It's around this time that people could look forward to the last of the bad weather and longer days. It was a time to celebrate and triumph over the past year of work, harvesting, and deaths. Plenty of our modern traditions can be linked back to these celebrations. In Scandinavia, the Norse celebrated Yule, setting Yule logs ablaze and turning up with drinks and revelry until the log burned out, approximately 12 days later. From December 19th to approximately December 23rd on the Julian calendar, ancient Romans indulged in Saturnalia to worship Saturn, the god of agriculture. Gladiators fought to the death, with the losers being designated as offerings. Citizens gambled and gave gifts. There were orgies. Women dressed like men and men dressed like women. The enslaved were treated to banquets by their masters in a stunning role reversal that also included the enslaved being able to disrespect their masters with free speech. After the time Jesus rolled around, when the Catholic Church was establishing traditions and seeking to peacefully assimilate pagan converts, the story of Jesus' birth, which in the Bible does not mention a time of year, was made to be December 25th to make it easy for pagans to still celebrate their winter solstice traditions, but with a focus on Christ. By the Middle Ages, Christianity was a carnival-like event across Europe with drunken revelry, begging, and gambling. It went through periods of popularity and outright bans, and was eventually brought to America in the 1500s by the Spanish. Among the 13 colonies, Christmas took off quickly in the South and Mid-Atlantic, but was banned in Puritan New England for its first 50 years. The South is where many of the most popular Christmas traditions, gifts, caroling, decorating, were cultivated. Like all of slavery, the Christmas experience, though always a part of a traumatic and evil system, varied from location to location, master by master. There are accounts of single days off, 2 days off, 3 to 5 days, and even 2 weeks. One extreme and rare permission allowed the enslaved of a certain section of Missouri to have 5 weeks off for Christmas. Recalled an enslaved person, we could come and go as much as we pleased and go for miles as we wanted to, but we had better be back by the 1st of February. And that's another thing. Some enslaved were allowed to travel during their Christmas time off, whether that meant going to visit family on another plantation, going to get married as marriage rates increased during this period of the year, or going to earn some money. That's right, some enterprising enslaved people used the time to capitalize on their labor, as it was believed by their enslavers that any money earned by a person during the holidays was their own to keep. Wrote Frederick Douglass in his autobiography, "The staid, sober, thinking, and industrious ones of our number would employ themselves in making corn brooms, mats, horse collars, and baskets, and another class of us would spend the time in hunting opossums, hares, and coons." A man named Clayton Holbert, who worked on a plantation of 100 enslaved in Tennessee, said, "The slaves used to dance or go to the prayer meeting to pass their time. There were also festivals we went to during the Christmas vacation. There was always a big celebration on Christmas. We worked until Christmas Eve, and from that time until New Year's, we had a vacation. We had no such thing as Thanksgiving. We had never heard of such a thing." And there are some enslaved who recall not getting a Christmas at all. But for the majority of the enslaved in the South, whether it was a day or 7 or more or less, the holiday season was a time of rest and relaxation. And when that got boring, partying. Wrote Douglass, "By far the larger part engaged in such sports and merriments as playing ball, wrestling, running foot races, fiddling, dancing, and drinking whiskey. And this latter mode of spending the time was by far the most agreeable to the feelings of our masters. The hearty drinking drinking was for a number of reasons. It was well known that Southern whites drank to excess during the Christmas season, with diaries, letters, and newspapers revealing that even genteel white women and children were allowed to participate in leisurely drinking they were kept from for the rest of the year. Take this quote from a 19th century observer of Southern Christmas traditions. "Christmas is a general scene of dissipation and idleness. Some folks spent the time making rough jokes. Apprentice boys and little Negroes fired guns and crackers. And everyone, parents, children, servants, old, young, white, black, and yellow, drank hard." If you inquire, what is it all for? No earthly reason is assigned, except this: why, man? It is Christmas. Many slave owners also allowed the enslaved to drink, even though the rest of the year it was illegal to do so. In fact, several slave owners encouraged, if not downright forced, their captives to drink during the holiday season. Wrote Frederick Douglass in his autobiography, "It was deemed a disgrace not to get drunk at Christmas." Douglass explained that he believed Christmas, and definitely the drinking portion of it, to be a tool of oppression in which people deprived of freedom and autonomy were overloaded with alcohol, degraded, made to be hungover, and then reminded by their masters that a master was needed to keep them from making poor choices. One man who escaped to freedom, named Francis Frederick, backed this up, saying his enslaver would force his captives to drink for 4 to 5 days and then say, "Now you slaves, don't you see what bad use you have been making of your liberty?" John Smith of North Carolina, however, seemed to represent a portion of enslaved who either received watered down liquor or didn't drink to excess. He recalled, "My master give us Christmas. Sometimes he give us 2 weeks before we went to work again. We had plenty of liquor, but nobody got drunk." Of course, not all masters allowed drinking or even allowed dancing. A woman named Henrietta McCullers, who said she loved her master in North Carolina all her life, also said her enslaver didn't want her slaves to dance because she was such a good Christian. Showing even more diversity among the enslaved is the fact that there were some groups that outright refused drinking or dancing, instead opting to hold small religious ceremonies while their fellows gallivanted and indulged around them. One former enslaved woman named Susan Dabney Swedes recalled how an entire plantation in Mississippi stopped the tradition of dancing to banjos and fiddles after everyone converted to baptism. While some masters allowed this autonomy, others did not. Jacob Stroyer wrote, "A great many of the strict members of the church who did not dance at Christmas would be forced to do it to please their masters." One super rare Christmas time phenomenon took place in my home state of North Carolina, near the coastal area and in the Caribbean exclusively. John Canoe, or John Canoe, or John Canoe, depending on various sources, involved young enslaved men dressing in costumes and going from house to house singing, beating drums, and dancing in exchange for gifts. They were called cooners. Recalled Harriet Jacobs in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, "Every child rises on Christmas morning to see the John Canoes. Without them, Christmas would be shorn of its greatest attraction." The origin of John Canoe is mysterious, with roots in England and changes made by enslaved people from West Africa. Along with involving some male participants dressing up as women, it contained elements of those Christmas celebrations we discussed in the Middle Ages: rowdiness, public drunkenness, and lewdness. Coincidentally, the same types of celebrations taking place among the white population everywhere else. Wrote a woman in her diary in New Bern, North Carolina in 1858, "Christmas was celebrated here as usual. In the morning, the cooners were out. The streets were densely thronged with Negroes. This week will be a general stir-up among them, after which things will again resume a more quiet aspect." In the 1830s, Alabama, Louisiana, and Arkansas became the first to declare Christmas a state holiday. For slaveholding states, Christmas was a tool to prevent rebellion or a way to keep the enslaved in line for the rest of the year. Wrote Douglass, "They do not give the slaves this time because they would not like to have their work during its continuance, but because they know it would be unsafe to deprive them of it." Christmas on the plantation, like the institution of slavery itself, was definitely paternalistic. And like paternalistic narratives about happy slave folk given shelter and food by their caring masters, Christmas reinforced the system itself. On one hand, masters could use the threat of withholding Christmas to make his or her enslaved people work harder, snitch on each other, or otherwise stay in line. Gifts were given to enslaved as a way to alleviate guilt, or simply lend credence to the notion of the benevolent slave owner who loved his slaves as if they were second-class members of the family. Wrote one Louisiana slave owner in 1836, "We had a right white Merry Christmas. I am much more reconciled to my condition as a slave owner when I see how cheerful and happy my fellow creatures can be in a state of servitude, how much I have it in my power to minister to their happiness. How about you set them free? Make them happy for real. Some enslaved played a game called Christmas Gift, where they would attempt to sneak up on their master and yell the phrase at them. If the enslaved said Christmas gift first, they would receive a gift. One woman even recalled she and her family sneaking into the big house to hide around the house to jump out of corners at their white owners. Some masters gave their enslaved money, possibly in a foolish attempt to appear charitable and fair-natured. Recalled a former South Carolina enslaved man, "Master always carried a roll of money as big as my arm. He would come up to the quarter on Christmas, July 4th, and Thanksgiving, and get up on a stump and call all the children out. Then he would throw money to them. At Christmas, he would throw $10 bills. This was, of course, very rare and could have possibly been the words of a brainwashed former enslaved person trying to make his master sound wealthy and kind to a listening WPA interviewer. Masters were more likely to give small gifts of sugar, tobacco, hats, ribbons, bandanas, and other trinkets. They provided liquor, as mentioned, but also luxury foods that weren't available for the rest of the year. Some enslaved remember how they never got meat except for on Christmas. For those of you who watched a buffet of black food history, you know how underfed enslaved people often were, and therefore know the importance of receiving luxury food once a year to someone with little else to look forward to. Recalled one Georgia baker, "Oh, what a time us slaves did have on Christmas Day. Cake of all kinds, fresh meat, light bread, turkeys, chickens, ducks, geese, and all sorts of wild game. There was always plenty of pecans, apples, and dried peaches too." Eggnog, of course, notable for having the illicit whiskey, was also highly expensive, requiring eggs, fresh cream, and sugar. Some masters made a big show of preparing the beverage and giving a cup to each of their enslaved, in a similar role reversal to the Roman masters of Saturnalia who served their enslaved once a year. In the 16th century, the Spanish told their Jesuit inspectors to gift bundles of clothing to Peruvian enslaved people at Christmas, similar to English enslavers gifting their victims in Jamaica in the 18th century. Also illustrating the long-running power dynamic of the holidays, there were European landowners treating a few of their peasants once a year to find food and drink, as was customary during the Middle Ages. I mean, think about it. During some of those antebellum Christmas celebrations, field hands who were usually kept out of the big house were sometimes served food in them or called inside to receive a gift. Recalled one white woman in her journal in 1858 spent the day waiting on the Negroes and making them as comfortable as possible. I'm sure she felt quite good about herself, regardless of the horror she otherwise inflicted on them. Honey. Shady. For the enslaved of poor masters or ones with the stingiest pockets, Christmas gifts were simply basic necessities they were going to get no matter what. Recall Jane Lassiter, "Course our shoes was given out at Christmas. We got one pair a year, and when they wore out, we got no more, and had to go barefooted the rest of the time." Others got a few extra ears of corn or some type of clothing garment to replace something already falling apart. And this is where we are especially reminded of the brutality and dehumanization of slavery, even if a few luxuries like rest were permitted during the holiday season. It is well known that there was an increased possibility of many enslaved being sold away from their families on New Year's Day, sometimes known as Hiring Day or Heartbreak Day. New Year's was the time that debts were collected and settled, meaning masters were more likely to move around their assets by selling enslaved people or renting them out. It's no wonder that some enslaved used the holidays as a period to rebel. Taking into account the drunkenness of the white population and the assortment of distractions, plus the possibility of being sold on New Year's, Christmas seemed like a good time to try to escaping. The winter months in general meant less of a chance of being seen, but the drunken Christmas period was especially alluring. Harriet Tubman led multiple people to freedom during Decembers in the 1850s, including her family members who she loved dearly. One of the most daring escapes took place by a married couple during Christmas of 1848. Ellen, the mulatto offspring of her master, posed as a disabled white man traveling with her slave, who was actually her husband William. The Crafts made it all the way to the north, only being detained once, miraculously walking free. And speaking of free, what if free blacks during Christmas? In the 18th century onward, when northern newspapers complained of Christmas rowdiness, they were often talking about the mixing of the races during these celebrations. This demonstrates that Christmas traditions of drunken revelry isn't just a holdover from slavery. It's also important to note that the relatively permissive atmosphere of Christmas began to diminish diminish as the country inched towards war. Two other events had a major impact as well. Of course, Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, which made more enslavers nervous and paranoid about the people they brutalized, popping their paternalistic bubbles and reining in privileges they once allowed, like prayer meetings, traveling, and the enslaved working for their own money. The other was the Baptist War, or Christmas Rebellion of 1831 in Jamaica. It consisted of a 10-day strike of 60,000 enslaved people, about 20% of the population of 300,000, demanding freedom and wages. As a result of the failed rebellion, roughly 500 enslaved were slaughtered, which further strengthened white American paranoia and emboldened its conviction that they needed to be ready to murder the black people they once considered to be like family. During the days of the Civil War, some masters wrote about their distaste for being too broke to hand out gifts to the enslaved. Wilmington area newspapers complained about the lack of John Canoes in 1863, also showing how much things had changed. By the dawn of 1875, a combination of the emerging temperance movement, black respectability politics, and white racist fears led to an end of John Canoes. Narratives about enslaved people enjoying their Christmases while enslaved and missing it after the Civil War would continue, along with lost cause rhetoric and rhetoric about the great old antebellum South. So the Civil War is over. Abraham Lincoln is dead, and Andrew Johnson is prioritizing loyalty to former slave owners as the South lays in ruins, making it clear he will not give black Americans any land or reparations. Wealthy and formerly wealthy planters are stripped of their paternalistic ownership of black people, but they get to keep their land and assets. Poor white people, once feeling superior to the enslaved they were allowed to oversee and hunt down for the slave trade, are still politically and economically powerless, but holding on to a racial hierarchy that will fuel hatred and lynchings for decades to come. Black people, meanwhile, in a social and economic limbo, are hoping for vast land reform and compensation for their labor, and the ability to work to build their communities. By fall of 1865, a rumor spread that during Christmas, black people would get land from the United States government, specifically the Freedmen's Bureau. It seemed plausible that such a grand gesture would be reserved for the time of year that these now freed people usually received gifts. Newspapers reported on these hopes and barely hid their anger that most freed people wanted land and to work for themselves instead of signing horrible labor contracts to their former masters. Papers pontificated on whether or not the letdown of no land would lead to violent insurrection at Christmas time. An Atlanta newspaper said that alcohol and bad white men would make blacks easily persuaded to commit outrage and violence. Quickly, these were followed up with printed rumors that there was a black conspiracy to lead a Christmas time insurrection, wrote a purported inside source to a New Orleans newspaper. On the night before Christmas, they would wreak their vengeance on whites whose names had already been chosen. The victims were to be identified to their attackers by signs and marks placed on each house and place of business. The Freedmen's Bureau then worked overtime to get word out to black people that there was not going to be any 40 acres and a mule, no land reform. The federal government was focusing on wage labor, not land ownership for black people, and I swear, go off in the comments, y'all, go off. But we gonna keep it focused on Christmas. Said one bureau representative to a group of black people, "Winter is coming on. Go back to your former masters, work, be obedient, and show that you are worthy of freedom. You expect the government to divide your late masters' lands out to you, and about the 1st of January you will get buggies and carriages, but you were mistaken. You will not get a cent. It all belongs to the former owners, and you will not get anything unless you work for it. You have had good masters. I know. I have been through here long enough to find out for myself." Believing that the free people would not listen to this disgustingly awful advice, encouraging them to accept wage slavery, which we all know turned to sharecropping, some whites manipulated the chaos to rearm themselves or disarm and harass freedmen. They absolutely worked themselves up into the same paranoia that has accompanied white supremacy from the very beginning. For example, one woman heard singing near her former slave quarters during the holidays of 1865 and said that it, quote, evoked expectations of a horde pouring into our houses to cut our throats and dance like fiends over our remains. So what happened during Christmas 1865? There were small confrontations and riots in some areas of the country, and in Alexandria, Virginia, 2 black men were killed. but there was no insurrection, and these events of white violence were written off as mere Christmas rowdiness by men who would defend the South from black people by any means necessary. You know, same old, same old. So let's fast forward to the 1880s, after Reconstruction has come to an end. There's an excellent compendium of black Christmas stories and narratives collected from the 1880s to 1953 that shows black people cherish the holiday without being told to by white supremacists. Because regardless of race, at the late 19th century, Christmas was a more popular holiday than ever and had become a federal holiday in 1870. St. Nicholas, who had been a monk born in Turkey around 280 AD and evolved over the centuries, was brought to America by Germans in the late 17th century and later immortalized for a wider group in the well-known 1822 poem in this 1863 cartoon by Thomas Nast. Santa was just one of the signs of Christmas's widespread commercialization, which was being directed towards children. This had slowly been happening, though in 19th century Christmas was still rowdy, drunken, and adult-centered. And according to Booker T. Washington, free people were engaging in negative behavior at Christmas time instilled in them during slavery. He wrote about his first winter in Tuskegee, Alabama, thusly: "We found that for a whole week, the colored people in and around Tuskegee dropped work the day before Christmas, and that it was difficult for anyone to perform any service from the time they stopped work until after the New Year. Persons who at other times did not use strong drink thought it quite the proper thing to indulge in it rather freely during the Christmas week. There was a widespread hilarity and a free use of guns, pistols, and gunpowder generally. The sacredness of the season seemed to have been almost wholly lost sight of." Through his position as head of Tuskegee, he brought more piety to the holiday and promoted charity and good works. This would have a lasting effect on greater society at large, especially when combined with the generosity of black churches during the holiday season. But sadly for Booker T. Washington, new traditions of charity and piety would fuse with old traditions. For example, folk singer Huddie Leadbelly Ledbetter, who hailed from a family of Southern Baptists, recalled going to church on Christmas Eve to celebrate the birth of baby Jesus, and then going home to drink hard liquor and dance for the next week straight. So of course, black people in the early 20th century had many of the traditions we have today. They caroled, they ate their best food, they congregated in church and at family homes, and as early as the 1920s there are newspaper articles mentioning children's desires for black Santa Clauses. Black newspapers were filled with appeals and thanks for contributions to Christmas charity programs and giveaways. Sunshine Sammy was the first black actor signed to a long-term contract, and he was in the Our Gang movie series, an early version of Little Rascals. He reportedly visited orphans in Columbus, Ohio, and performed for them. In 1936, legendary tap dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson was the first black person of note to dress as Santa at an annual Christmas Eve party for poor kids in Harlem. Speaking of performers, a conversation about black Christmas traditions in the 20th century can't exclude the plethora of musical contributions made by black artists. If YouTube wouldn't demonetize me, I would have an A1 medley for you right here, but I will mention that my favorite Christmas song of all time, Santa Baby by Eartha Kitt, debuted in 1953. Oh, and something else cool happened in 1953 in Akron, Ohio. Helen Arnold and her husband Roy had 8 children with a 9th on the way, and times were tough. While shopping during the Christmas season with 4 of her children in tow at a local department store, a middle-aged white man complimented her on her children and gave her $20 before disappearing into the crowd. Helen wrote a letter to the local paper saying, "I do not know the gentleman, but wherever he is, I'm sure he does not know what a lift he gave me. I was able to pay cash for part of the clothing I was planning to put in layaway." She mentioned she had 8 kids and thanked him for his kindness. 2 days later, the newspaper received an envelope with 4 more 20s that read, "I had no way of knowing the lady had 8 children. I may have a few earthly dollars, but she is the one that's blessed. And with 8 little ones to find time to acknowledge the little gift, you are deserving." He signed the letter Santa Claus. For perspective, that $100 was worth about $1,035 in today's money. But it wasn't the end. More envelopes arrived during the Christmases of 1955 through 1962, and 2 more in 1964 and 1965. The amount was roughly $25,000 in today's money. Said USA Today last year, "With Santa's gifts, the family bought shoes, clothes, and toys for the kids, paid off house bills, purchased coal for the furnace, and acquired other needed items." And this money would have an even bigger impact. Helen would go on to be the president of the local NAACP, and in 1977, she was the first black woman elected to the Akron Board of Education, a position she was re-elected to 5 times until her death in 2001. Secret Santa's identity was never revealed. In addition to giving and accepting gifts in the bustling consumerist economy, there was drip. Christmas was one of those times for black people to dress in their Sunday best, a tradition that even took place during slavery. Many plantation owners remarked seeing enslaved people take extra pride in their appearance during the holidays, especially because they had time to do so. Christmas was also about being with family and cherishing their time, especially important during the lynchings and racial turbulence of the Civil Rights Movement. One tragic Christmas story occurred in 1951 when 2 NAACP organizers, a married couple celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary, died from a bomb explosion on their home in Mims, Florida. Henriette and Harry Moore had helped grow NAAC membership in Florida to over 10,000, and as a 6th grade teacher, Henriette taught her students real black history and exposed them to black literature. But it was the couple's investigation of lynchings that led to them being targeted by the Klan and killed on Christmas Day. Speaking of the Klan, there is this really annoying story from 1948 showing a Talladega, Alabama division of the KKK gifting a radio to 107-year-old former enslaved man Jack Riddle and his 86-year-old wife Josie. The radio was so Uncle Jack could hear the preachers, with Grand Dragon Samuel Green elaborating that the Klan doesn't hate Negroes. The couple was also given a box of fruit, nuts, and candy, with a Klan spokesperson telling them, "We will provide you all the batteries you want all next year." This publicized event served the same purpose as enslavers gifting presents in the antebellum period, to show alleged benevolence and fairness. The Atlanta Constitution quoted Green as saying, "The Klan believes in white supremacy and segregation. The Klan also believes in treating Negroes fairly and honestly." Of course, the newspaper spun the press, with one claiming that the bullshit PR move by the KKK proves its fairness. As the Civil Rights Movement progressed, Christmas became a chance not just to buy PR for your racist organizations or to buy gifts and be consumers, though this was soon the prevailing tradition, but there was a chance to make a statement. In 1962, there was a Christmas boycott in Jackson, Mississippi, after the murder of Medgar Evers, in which the entire black population refrained from patroning white-owned businesses. The next year, this Black Christmas strategy was adopted by a group of black artists and a national call to boycott Christmas altogether. The Association of Artists for Freedom was made up of writers John O'Killens and James Baldwin, singer Odetta, journalist Louis Lomax, and actors Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis. To understand what pissed them off enough to call a nationwide boycott, we have to look at Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. A Birmingham church bombing took the lives of 4 black girls, Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol Denise McNair, on September 15th. Though it was the first bombing to kill, it was the 28th unsolved bombing of black homes, churches, and businesses in the city overall. Many people know about these girls, but not the other victims from that day. That afternoon, after the morning bombing, 2 white teenagers leaving a canceled anti-integration rally shot and killed one of 2 black boys they saw on a bike. The black boy they killed was Virgil Lamar Ware. He was 13, he played football, and he wanted to be a lawyer. Shortly after that, a cop shot a black boy named Johnny Robinson in the back. In the midst of all this murder, the AAF called for a nationwide boycott of Christmas. It was meant to draw attention to racism nationwide and not just southern cities. It was supported by Adam Clayton Powell Sr. and Martin Luther King Jr., but did not find the full necessary support from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, especially within the short time frame of 2 months from October to December. No other major civil rights groups endorsed the call to boycott. Most importantly, white publishers and black publishers alike were reluctant to cover the boycott because it was at odds with their advertising income. Jet magazine asked should Negroes boycott Santa in October 1963, but the press was not persuasive or persistent. John H. Johnson, proprietor of Jet and Ebony, dismissed the boycott as coming from a very small segment of the civil rights movement, having little chance of being put into effect. By the way, Ebony magazine had tripled its advertising revenue during this period, so Christmas shopping of 1963 pretty much proceeded as usual. In 1969, the economic progress arm of the SCLC, Operation Breadbasket, endorsed a different kind of Black Christmas with its Christmas campaign. Speaking to Ebony magazine, leader Jesse Jackson spoke of wanting to change Santa's image and reshape Black people's perceived dependence not just on the magical gift giver, but on white businesses as well. Jesse introduced a Black Santa in a dashiki of black velvet trimmed in red, gold, and green. They gave gifts to jailed Black inmates and distributed candy from a soul power bag. All of this was critiquing the concept of white Christmas, or the recent push to encourage Black people to spend their money during the holiday season, including them in advertisements and stuff, draining the Black community of precious resources. Said Jesse, instead of too many breakable toys, we need to give our children a savings account at a Black bank or savings and loan association. He also promoted gifting fellow adults with Black news subscriptions and shopping from Black-owned businesses. Responses to Ebony magazine about Black Christmas in 1970 are eerily familiar. Wrote Miss F. Nesbitt from Charleston, South Carolina, "I do not know what color has to do with the enjoyment of Christmas. Whether Santa is black or white or red or green, it doesn't matter. Black Christmas, Black Christ, what will they think of next?" Did anybody tell her that Jesus was black, or what did she say when she found it out? And there was Mrs. Bertha Husband from Brooklyn, who would fit right in with modern conversations on where to spend money. She said, "Why as a Black woman should I have to pay more solely for the purpose of buying black? I don't relish what the white man is doing with my money, but he is cheaper. Why can't Blacks charge the same prices or lower their prices just to attract the Black trade?" Then there was an anonymous reader who denounced Ebony magazine as militant and radical for the Black Christmas story and encouraging Black people to vote for Black interests. Oh my God, there's a few every generation, huh? Also in 1969, Shaletto's department store in Cincinnati came under fire for refusing to hire a Black Santa, with the local population threatening a boycott. Said the store owner, "This has nothing to do with the quality of employment. It just doesn't fit the symbol as kids have known it." He folded next year, and many other department stores in the 70s throughout the late 20th century began hiring Black Santas. Those in predominantly urban areas were quickest to do so. It's also worth mentioning that Bloomstein's department store in Harlem first employed a Black Santa Claus since 1943. By the end of the 20th century, businesses were including Black Christmas shoppers in other ways too. The amount of Black toys grew, as well as demand for Black Christmas cards. Said a spokesman for American Greetings Corp in 1983, "Industry-wide, we are showing that approximately 1 million Black Christmas cards will be purchased this year." In response, the company created 21 Black designs, most featuring a Black Jesus. I know Miss F. Nesbitt from Charleston, South Carolina was crying and throwing up, honey. Black Jesus. Before leaving this segment, I want to bring up Kwanzaa, which coincidentally has a similar origin story to Thanksgiving. When hard-nosed Puritans arrived in New England and banned the celebration of Christmas as an evil, ungodly holiday, they instead contrived Thanksgiving. When Maulana Karenga created Kwanzaa in 1966, he wanted to create an alternative holiday to Christmas because it was the white man's holiday, and Christianity the white man's religion, and he wanted people to get back in touch with their roots. Inspired by first fruit festivals in Africa, the holiday came to be celebrated from December 26th to January 1st and promoted African culture and pride along with community service. That last one is especially important due to the principles of unity, collective work and responsibility, purpose, and cooperative economics. Initially wanting people to embrace Kwanzaa instead of Christmas, by the 90s, Karenga seemed to accept that most of the American population who celebrated it were celebrating it along with Christmas. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, when the Black Power movement was at its peak, a number of Black people did reject Christmas altogether for Kwanzaa. Tony Brown, host of Black Journal, hosted a special on Kwanzaa that no doubt attracted new celebrators. Over the next decade, it was clearly growing in the mainstream, snuggled here and there among middle-class Black media, celebrating the holiday season as a whole. For instance, a 1975 Ebony Jr. magazine included games and poems about Kwanzaa along with the usual Christmas fare. There were festivals and organizations in many Black urban areas, and by 1990, a New York Times article estimated 13 million people were celebrating Kwanzaa, but not without Christmas. A lot of Blacks didn't want to get involved because they thought we were asking them to give up Christmas to celebrate some pagan African holiday, said Kwanzaa enthusiast and activist Cedric McClester in 1990. So, getting more people interested in Kwanzaa took promotion in the 80s along with presenting it alongside Christmas. In 1983, Ebony magazine covered Kwanzaa in an article titled "The New Soul Christmas." The article examined the way black people were forging their own Christmas traditions, even mentioning that one black woman from New Orleans was going to the Bahamas to celebrate Jonkonnu, showing that the obscure Christmas tradition was still alive and well in the Caribbean. But Kwanzaa was taking root in the States, wrote the magazine. That does not mean that traditional Christmas rituals are ignored or neglected. In most cases, black Americans are combining carols and Christmas trees and black-oriented images and rituals which express their new sense of somebodyness. Less than 10 years later, there were concerns about the holiday being commercialized like Christmas, said one smart 15-year-old. Everybody's being black now and doing Kwanzaa. There will be those who will commercialize it and turn it into a fad. Once something becomes popular, everybody wants to cash in on it. By 1997, Bill Clinton noted it as a holiday, and every president after would issue Kwanzaa greetings. There were greeting cards, decor for sale, stamps, a whole bunch of Kwanzaa capitalism. Over the years, the popularity of the holiday has waned, but it still has a core base of celebrators in America and more around the world. By 2015, the most recent survey put Kwanzaa celebrations at around 6 million people in America, or around 1.9% of the population. A 2014 article from The Atlantic summed up what I have witnessed anecdotally as a black Southerner all my life. Among Christians, the two groups who share the most in their approach to Christmas celebrations are white and minority evangelical Protestants. These two groups stand apart even from other Christians in that they are significantly more likely to celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday, to read the Christmas story from the Bible, and to believe that the nativity narrative, including the virgin birth, the angels communicating with shepherds, the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem, and the arrival of wise men from the East, is historically accurate. Majorities of white and minority Protestants also report that they attend religious services on Christmas Day, where they will hear the same stories, light the same Advent candles, and sing the same carols. What does all this mean? Christmas is one of the many subjects that shows how complicated our community has always been and how frighteningly similar our beliefs and traditions can be to people who hate us or see us as subservient. But that is history in a nutshell. Complex, sometimes tragic, sometimes fun, and often containing traditions that aren't always started with the best intentions. Whether Christmas is explicitly a religious experience for you, or about hanging out with family, turning up, giving back, or shopping and gifting to your heart's content, it's important to remember that Christmas is what you want it to be. It's not inherently Christian because it's a spin-off of pagan celebrations surrounding the winter solstice, nor is it inherently about being gifted nice things, drinking eggnog, or going caroling. These are all traditions weaved in over time. With all that being said, I hope we all use Christmas time to think about the fragility and preciousness of life and how important it is to celebrate what we have despite a long year of trials and tribulations. I hope we all treasure the traditions we want to treasure and make new ones too. I thank you so much for watching this, and I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays.